He was supposed to be Red Bull's golden boy, the next great champion following in the footsteps of Sebastian Vettel, but something went terribly wrong. Despite his raw talent, fearless overtakes, and electric personality, Daniel Ricciardo never claimed an F1 title. Now, after years of ups and downs, his career hangs by a thread. So what really happened? How did one of the most beloved drivers in F1 history go from future world champion to nearly forgotten? The early days, a young talent on the rise. Daniel Ricciardo's passion for racing wasn't just a childhood hobby, it was in his blood. Growing up in Perth, Australia, young Daniel would watch his father Giuseppe compete in local racing events, mesmerized by the sound of roaring engines and the thrill of high-speed competition. It didn't take long for him to want a taste of the action himself. At just 9 years old, Ricciardo got behind the wheel of a go-kart, and from that moment, there was no turning back. His love for racing quickly became an obsession, and as he climbed through the ranks of junior karting, it became clear that he wasn't just another kid with a dream. He had real, undeniable talent. Karting was just the beginning. Determined to chase his Formula One aspirations, Ricciardo pushed himself through the grueling world of junior racing. Unlike many young drivers backed by wealthy families, Ricciardo had to fight for every opportunity. His natural skill and aggressive driving style helped him stand out, earning him a seat in the competitive world of single-seater racing. At 16, he made the jump to open-wheel racing, competing in the Formula Ford Championship. His results weren't spectacular. He finished 8th in his debut season, but it was enough to prove that he had potential. However, the real turning point came when he moved to Europe, where the toughest competition awaited. Ricciardo's next step was the Formula Renault 2 Series, a championship known for developing future F1 stars. Competing in both the Italian and Euro Cup series, he faced a steep learning curve but quickly adapted, showing flashes of brilliance. By the end of his second season, he finished 6th in the Italian series, an impressive result, but not enough to guarantee a clear path to Formula One. Still, his performances had caught the eye of key figures in the racing world, and soon an opportunity would arise that would put him head-to-head with another future F1 star, Valtteri Bottas. The Bottas rivalry and proving himself in Europe. Every great driver has a rival, and for Daniel Ricciardo, that rivalry began in the Euro Cup Formula Renault 2 Series. The 2008 season saw him go wheel-to-wheel with Valtteri Bottas, a driver who would later become a multiple-time Grand Prix winner with Mercedes. The battle between them was intense, with both drivers pushing each other to their limits. The championship came down to the wire, and in the end, Bottas edged out Ricciardo by just 3 points. It was a bitter defeat, but it only fueled Ricciardo's determination to prove himself further. He had shown that he could compete with the best young drivers in Europe, and now the next step was within reach. In the middle of the 2008 season, Ricciardo got the call he had been waiting for. An opportunity to race in the British Formula 3 Championship, a series that had launched the careers of drivers like Ayrton Senna and Lewis Hamilton. Driving for the renowned Carlin team, Ricciardo knew this was his chance to make a name for himself. The competition was fierce, with future F1 names like Nico Hülkenberg and Jules Bianchi on the grid. But Ricciardo was unfazed. He adapted quickly, proving that he was more than just a promising junior driver. He was a genuine star in the making. The following season, in 2009, Ricciardo was unstoppable. Dominating the British Formula 3 Championship, he secured the title in spectacular fashion, finishing 87 points ahead of his closest rival. His aggressive overtaking and natural racecraft made him a standout, and Red Bull took notice. By this point, Ricciardo was on their radar as a potential future F1 driver. With the backing of Red Bull's junior program, his path to the top tier of motorsport was clearer than ever. However, there were still hurdles to overcome. A move to the Formula Renault 3.5 series awaited him, and with it, the highest level of competition he had ever faced. But before he could reach Formula One, a terrifying incident at Silverstone nearly derailed his dreams. Dominating in Formula 3 and catching Red Bull's attention, stepping up to Formula Renault 3.5 was a massive leap for Ricciardo. This series was a direct feeder to Formula One, and many of the sport's biggest names had passed through its ranks. Competing against experienced racers, including future three-time Le Mans winner Brendan Hartley, Ricciardo needed to prove he belonged. And he did. Right from the start, he showcased blistering pace, securing pole position in 6 of his first 12 races. He was on track for a championship push when disaster struck at Silverstone. During one of the crucial races of the season, Ricciardo suffered a brutal crash that left his car in ruins. For many young drivers, such an incident could shake their confidence, but Ricciardo wasn't like most drivers. Despite the setback, he continued to push forward, finishing the season as runner-up in the championship. It was a near miss, but it solidified his reputation as one of the most exciting young talents in motorsport. By the end of the year, he had done enough to catch the attention of Formula One teams, and one in particular was ready to give him a shot. Red Bull, known for scouting and nurturing young talent, had been watching Ricciardo closely. With their junior program designed to fast-track promising drivers into F1, they decided to place him in the reserve driver role for Scuderia Toro Rosso, their sister team. It was a crucial step. If Ricciardo could prove himself in testing and Friday practice sessions, he would be first in line for a full-time F1 seat. The dream was finally within reach. By mid-2011, that moment arrived. HRT Racing, a struggling backmarker team, needed a driver, and Red Bull arranged for Ricciardo to make his Formula One debut at the British Grand Prix, the same track where he had crashed just a year prior. It was a full-circle moment, but also a harsh reality check. The HRT car was painfully slow, and Ricciardo spent most of his races at the back of the grid. However, he made the most of the opportunity, gaining valuable experience and showing glimpses of his potential. His real chance would come in 2012, when Red Bull placed him at Toro Rosso full-time. This was his moment to prove he belonged in Formula One. The dream becomes reality. Entering Formula One, Ricciardo's first full season in Formula One with Toro Rosso in 2012 was filled with learning curves. The midfield battle was intense, and while Toro Rosso wasn't a front-running team, it provided him with a platform to develop his racecraft at the highest level. His performances were solid, but he wasn't just competing against the other drivers. He was competing against his own teammate, Jean-Éric. Red Bull had a habit of promoting the best talent from their junior team, and Ricciardo knew that if he wanted a shot at the main team, he had to outperform Verne. Over the next 2 seasons, Ricciardo steadily improved. He outqualified Vergne 30-7 in their time as teammates and showed flashes of brilliance in wheel-to-wheel battles. The turning point came in 2013 when Red Bull's Mark Webber announced his retirement. That left a vacant seat alongside Sebastian Vettel, and Ricciardo wanted it. He had proven his pace, consistency, and ability to handle the pressure. Red Bull's bosses took notice, and in a bold move, they chose Ricciardo to step up to the senior team. For Ricciardo, this was it, the moment he had worked his entire life for. He was no longer a junior driver. He was about to go head-to-head with a 4-time world champion, and the motorsport world was watching closely. Would he rise to the occasion, or would he crumble under the pressure? The answer would shock everyone. The Red Bull promotion, taking on a 4-time champion. For any young driver, stepping up to Red Bull Racing was a dream come true. But for Daniel Ricciardo, it also meant going head-to-head with Sebastian Vettel, a driver who had just won 4 consecutive world championships. Many expected Ricciardo to struggle. After all, he was stepping into a team that had been built around Vettel. But from the very first race of the 2014 season, Ricciardo made one thing clear. He was not here to play second fiddle. At the season opener in Australia, Ricciardo shocked the F1 world by qualifying on the front row, outpacing Vettel and finishing second in the race. Unfortunately, due to a technical infringement, he was later disqualified, stripping him of what should have been his first ever F1 podium. But that didn't shake his confidence. Ricciardo quickly bounced back, and over the course of the season, he would deliver one of the most impressive debut campaigns in Red Bull's history. While Vettel struggled with the new hybrid-era regulations, Ricciardo thrived. He mastered the tricky RB10 chassis, using his fearless overtaking skills to snatch 3 victories in Canada, Hungary, and Belgium. What made these wins even more remarkable was that Red Bull was no longer the dominant force it once was. Mercedes had taken over as the new powerhouse, but Ricciardo was the only non-Mercedes driver to stand on the top step of the podium that season. His ability to outbrake, outmaneuver, and outthink his rivals made him one of the most exciting drivers to watch. By the end of 2014, Ricciardo had outscored Vettel by 71 points. an unthinkable feat at the start of the year. Vettel, sensing a shift in the team's dynamics, left Red Bull for Ferrari, leaving Ricciardo as the new team leader. But just when it seemed like Ricciardo's rise to championship contention was inevitable, things started to unravel. Red Bull's dominance had ended, and instead of fighting for wins, Ricciardo found himself battling in the midfield. The arrival of a new teammate in 2016, a teenage sensation named Max Verstappen, changed everything. Red Bull had a new rising star, and Ricciardo was about to face the toughest challenge of his career: the Red Bull struggles and the Verstappen problem. For years, Daniel Ricciardo had been Red Bull's golden boy, but in 2016, a new face entered the scene: Max Verstappen. At just 18 years old, Verstappen was already being hailed as a future world champion, and when Red Bull made the controversial decision to promote him to the senior team mid-season, everything changed. Verstappen's first race for Red Bull was a nightmare for Ricciardo. At the Spanish Grand Prix, Verstappen shocked the world by winning on his debut with the team, becoming the youngest race winner in F1 history. Meanwhile, Ricciardo had been put on a compromise strategy by Red Bull, leaving him frustrated and questioning whether the team was truly backing him as their #1 driver. Over the next 2 seasons, tensions between Ricciardo and Verstappen grew. They were evenly matched on pace, but Verstappen was younger, aggressive, and some believed Red Bull's clear long-term investment. Their on-track battles were fierce, but the real boiling point came in Baku 2018, where the two teammates collided in dramatic fashion, taking both Red Bulls out of the race. The team refused to blame just one driver, but many believed Verstappen's defensive driving was reckless. Ricciardo was furious, and it became clear that something had to change. At the same time, Red Bull's relationship with Renault was deteriorating. The team was switching to Honda engines for 2019, and Ricciardo wasn't convinced it was the right move. He felt like he was being forced into a supporting role at Red Bull, while Verstappen was becoming the team's priority. So, he made a shocking decision, one that would change the trajectory of his career forever. Despite having a competitive car, Ricciardo chose to leave Red Bull and sign with Renault. Many saw it as a step down, a career gamble, but Ricciardo believed it was the only way to escape Verstappen's shadow. But did he make the right call? Looking back, it's a decision that may have cost him everything. The Renault gamble, a career-altering decision. When Daniel Ricciardo announced that he was leaving Red Bull for Renault in 2019, the F1 world was stunned. Renault was nowhere near as competitive as Red Bull, and many questioned why Ricciardo would abandon a race-winning car to join a midfield team. Was it really about escaping Verstappen's shadow, or did he truly believe in Renault's project? In his first season with Renault, Ricciardo quickly realized the reality of his decision. While he was used to fighting for podiums at Red Bull, Renault was barely scraping into the top 10. The car lacked pace, and Ricciardo found himself battling in the midfield with teams like McLaren and Racing Point instead of Mercedes and Ferrari. But despite the struggles, he remained optimistic. He knew this was a long-term project, and he was willing to put in the work. Throughout 2019, Ricciardo still managed to show flashes of brilliance. He pulled off spectacular overtakes, outperformed his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, and secured some solid results, including a P4 finish in Italy. But the podiums and wins he had once enjoyed at Red Bull were nowhere to be found. Had he made a mistake? By 2020, things started to improve. Renault made progress, and Ricciardo finally scored 2 podiums, his first in over 2 years. It was a sign that things were moving in the right direction, but just when it seemed like Renault was turning a corner, Ricciardo made another shocking move. With McLaren showing strong performances, Ricciardo decided to leave Renault after just 2 seasons to join McLaren in 2021. Many saw this as an upgrade, a move that would put him back in podium contention. But what happened next was the biggest disappointment of his career. The McLaren high and low? When Daniel Ricciardo joined McLaren in 2021, expectations were sky high. The team had been improving rapidly, and with a young, talented teammate in Lando Norris, it seemed like the perfect place for Ricciardo to reignite his career. But from the very first race, something felt off. Ricciardo struggled to adapt to the McLaren car. It didn't suit his natural driving style, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't match Norris's pace. The frustration built up as Norris consistently outperformed him, finishing ahead in almost every race. But then, in Monza 2021, Ricciardo did the unthinkable. He won. Against all odds, Ricciardo dominated the Italian Grand Prix, securing McLaren's first victory since 2012. It was a magical moment, and fans hoped it would be the turning point for his career. But it wasn't. The struggles continued into 2022, and his performances got even worse. By mid-season, McLaren made a brutal decision. They dropped Ricciardo for 2023, the AlphaTauri return and the end of an era. Without a seat for 2023, Ricciardo returned to Red Bull as a reserve driver, hoping for a second chance. That chance came when AlphaTauri called him back mid-season, replacing Nick de Vries. But the fairy tale comeback didn't go as planned. A broken hand ruled him out for several races, and when he returned, he was struggling to keep up with Yuki Tsunoda. Now, in 2024, Ricciardo's future is uncertain. His performances haven't been strong enough to secure a top seat, and rumors suggest he may be replaced for 2025. Has Daniel Ricciardo's time in F1 come to an end? Or does he have one final trick up his sleeve? Only time will tell.